So this evening, with our fabulous panel of women, we will be doing our best to provide a quick snapshot of the challenges women faced at the time, as well as the tough, supportive, creative and loving ways in which they negotiated this landscape and carved their own space within it. So this evening aims to celebrate the achievements and contributions of women, but also to underscore how women acted as innovators and experimenters within the beating heart of the underground.
So let me take a moment just to very briefly introduce you to our incredible panel. You should have some programme notes which will give their bios in a little more detail, but let me just offer perhaps Sophia and my perspective on you, if we may. So we'd like to start with Carol Grimes, and we were thinking about Elko Sheeda's statement in Folk World, where Sheeda says, Carol Grimes uses her great but raw voice to express all the corners of emotion into her music, which encompasses blues, jazz and world music. And Carol joined her first groups, Shades of Grey and The Race, from the mid-60s, and went on to sing with the bands Babylon, Delivery and Uncle Dog before releasing her solo albums. In her autobiography, The Singer's Tale, she's very clear about her journey of becoming increasingly politicised, recognising the unequal treatment of women, particularly within the music industry, but also the racial inequalities surrounding where she herself lived. And this led to her first performing in 1976 at the first Rock Against Racism gig, and going on to support Rock Against Sexism. So Carol's autobiography, The Singer's Tale, marks a number of times where Carol's opportunities to write and sing her own songs are blocked, or her words rewritten into someone else's narrative and agenda. But this book, rich in evocative sensorial detail, emphasises an ability to harness and release her words just as powerfully as her voice. And Carol is still performing and is musical director of the Bloomsbury Sing for Joy Choir and the Wildflowers Choir in Folkestone. She delivers workshops, and last weekend when she emailed me, she was supporting a new singer-songwriter to record their music for the first time. I would say that she epitomises a woman generously enabling the voices of others. So let me move now to Jill Brower, who in 1967, at the very young age of 15, became part of the Exploding Galaxy, a dance drama troupe, or, as McFarren describes, a psychedelic ballet, which had its home or base at 99 Bulls Pond Road, which she describes as a space of living art, where everyday processes and events become something to be investigated, transformed and performed, and also for it to be an environment to explore exciting kinetic art in different ways, or coming into collision with it, as she describes on her first encounter with it, but also for 99 Bulls Pond Road being a network of invigorating and inspiring people. She's published a book, 99 Bulls Pond Road, in 2014, which is just about to be reprinted. Do have a look at it, because it's an absolutely incredible chronicle, not only of the Exploding Galaxy, but of the artistic, social, cultural context of the time, and particularly of women's journeys through that period of time. And I would say it really reflects the way in which she is now, and has been, teacher, writer, and transmitter of her own knowledge and experiences, really importantly, to other women. So thank you. So let me move on to Jenny Spires. At a recent event, she described surrealist visual artist Penny Slinger as being like connective tissue. And I think that this is a really apt way to describe Jenny's central importance to and how she facilitated artistic practices within the counterculture. So she's talked quite extensively, or people have asked her very extensively about meeting Roger Sid Barrett when she was just 15 in Cambridge in December 1964, and how a very sweet love relationship evolved into a sensitive friendship during the 60s. And how she often travelled to London to see him and was fascinated by the processes of the recording studio experienced by Pink Floyd. But she herself, at the same time, had started off training in modern dance and then moved to London to attend the Lucy Clayton School, but ended up switching to the avant-garde English boy modelling agency, particularly enjoying modelling androgynous clothing for the celebrated boutique Granny Takes a Trip. And it's worth at this point mentioning her meeting of countercultural filmmaker Peter Whitehead and being shown the rushes for his new film, Tonight Let's All Make Love in London. She talks about intuitively recognising that Pink Floyd's music would be a perfect fit for tonight. And for me, this perfectly epitomises the way in which, in this moment and in many other moments of her life, she has acted as conductive tissue, bringing together different artists, different individuals to make exciting work together. She's a strategic connector. And let me finish then with Julie Felix at the end, who, born in America, folk icon Julie Felix arrived in the UK in 1964 after backpacking with her Mexican guitar around Europe, inspired by Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Establishing herself through folk clubs, concerts, and then via a regular spot as resident singer in 1966 on David Frost's Frost Report, Julie was given her own BBC TV series in 1968 called Once More with Felix, and her guests included people like Spike Milligan, Richard Harris, Leonard Cohen, Dusty Springfield, Donovan, and Jimmy Page. And I think she really brilliantly exemplifies someone who crosses both pop and the counterculture. And we can also get a sense of this from her stories about the mix of people and ideas in her parties at her Kings Road flat, where individuals from both pop and the counterculture would come together and a mix of exciting, heady ideas and new practices would be discussed, including trepanation. And you might want to check out her Flowers album, which includes a trepanation song in it. So she performed a sold-out concert at the Royal Albert Hall in 1966, which, like all her music, was rooted in an awareness that we all have a responsibility to each other. And indeed, she's one of the first popular singers to raise awareness of world poverty, and Julie's concert followed charitable visits to Jordan, Lebanon, and Kenya, and proceeds of the concert went via Christian Aid to raise money to bring relief to those suffering from the African famine. And this emphasis on protest, on a responsibility for the other, can be seen continued all the way through her practice to now, as she continues to protest, to gig, and indeed her forthcoming 80th birthday celebrations will be taking place via a wonderful concert on the 17th of June. And I feel that this concert is going to give everyone a taste of her emphasis in performance on communing with the audience, on respecting the other, which we might say is potentially at the heart of the counterculture and also, hopefully, of feminism.
Yay!
I'd like to kick things off by asking you all how you first came into contact with these experiments and these ideas and what we might now consider the counterculture. So what was that kind of first moment for you?
It was really through the beat scenario that I came into it, and I'd read On the Road, so that was quite influential in my life, and I kind of saw that there was a different way for me that I could go on the road, like Jack Kerouac, and I didn't have to wear a white dress and get married or go to university. So I felt very free to do that. I listened to a lot of music, and then I met Sid when I was 15. So he was very much of that ilk as well.
Well, I was folk singing in '66 at the age of 14 or 15, and we did the Edinburgh Festival as a group of schoolgirls, folk singers, and then we started doing pubs and folk clubs around London. And while we were at these clubs, we'd noticed a newspaper called IT, International Times. And what I didn't realise then was that it was like an internet. It was what everyone went to find out what was happening around the country, but especially in London. and people would read it from cover to cover, absolutely, even the small lads they'd read. And through that, I heard about a club which was originally called Night Tripper, but then became called UFO. And the first night of UFO was on the 23rd of December 1966. I went there, and I went every week until it moved to the Roundhouse. But it was there, it was like, the club was like a crucible in which all sorts of experimentation was carried out. So you had the situationalists, you had wonderful light shows, you had a band called the Third Ear Band, which was improvising. Do you remember that? Yeah, I do. And anything could happen. And there was this amazing artist called David Medalla who decided he wanted to set up a ballet troupe, a flower child ballet troupe. And I was all for it. So that's how I got involved. So there you are.
And interestingly, collections. It was in my room that I shared with my then partner Larry, who was an artist, and a little boy Sam, that Exploding Galaxy got its name because they would come round and chat and decide and have wonderful ideas. Anyway, connections. I think I got into, well, first of all, for me, it was a love of music and wanting to devour it. And this evening there is one of my oldest friends here, Maureen, known to me as Beat, and she and I, our connection was through Dr. Bernardo's, and we both ended up in Earl's Court and became friends, and our life, apart from trying to scratch the rent together and eat, was seeking out music. And we went to all the, I mean, basically the scene then was either the folk club scene, or you had the 100 Club, which still exists, and the Flamingo, and all sorts of places, the Troubadour, which was just down the road from where we lived. And so Beat and I spent our formative years seeking out the music. And gradually I thought, I want to do that. And that's how I started, I think, was just being inspired by what was happening in London at that time. This would be mid-60s through to 66 when I moved over to what was then known as the Grove. And there was a lovely, lovely, beautiful live music scene at that time, which I wish, in a way, instead of places closing, for the young generation out there, the new people wanting to play music, there are less places to play now than there were then. Among a few other things, which I won't go into now, we seem to be going blooming backwards.
I think it's what happened in the 60s was that all of us that felt like we were on the outside of things finally began to be included in some crazy dance that culminated in going down the King's Road on a Saturday afternoon in your pajamas. So I guess that I grew up in California, and I was already an outsider. I was half Mexican. I went to university and I got involved with some artists, and we really got involved. We weren't called hippies, we were beatniks. And I didn't even go to my university graduation because we thought we were being really cool not to do that. And then I suppose probably one of the biggest influences, my friend Don Wright, he said, "You had a mystical experience." And I said, well, I'd left the Catholic Church. That was a mystical experience for me. So I said, well, I don't believe in mystical experience. He said, well, you know, and he'd sent off to Texas for some cactus or something. And this was way back, you know, and I guess I get mixed up with my dates, but I think it was about 1960, 61, something like that. And he got these, and we all took these cactuses, and it was peyote, you know, and I had, you know, I never had more than a couple of glasses of wine, so it was really a strange experience for me. And they kept saying, take this, take that, and I said, you know, it's just a rose bush, you know, it's just a, and I thought they were being really stupid. And then so I walked away from them, looked down the ground, and there was this dandelion that said, hello. And so then I sort of, gave into the whole experience, which was quite extraordinary. I think that was actually before LSD. I think that was the sort of pre-runner of LSD, mescaline and all that. Anyway, so as I say, I went off to Europe, and my life has sort of been an unfolding of fate. I ended up going to Greece, and on the island of Greece there was a writer whose name was Leonard Cohen, and I just happened to be on the same island as he was, which has turned into a wonderful friendship, and we ended up singing together on television. But and then I traveled around, and I came to London to see a friend, and ended up singing in a folk club. So I kind of, but the whole counterculture, as I guess you call it, was a wonderful place for me to come, because I always felt like an outsider, like a stranger. It's like Leonard Cohen says, "I told you when I came I was a stranger. I was just a Joseph looking for a manger." And it was part of that. So I got caught up in, I had a friend who had a flat on the King's Road, and I eventually got in a lift in where she was living, and there was a guy in the lift called David Frost, and so he started talking to me, and I ended up being a singer on his program. So it was kind of an unfolding of fate, and I've been very blessed in a crazy existence. I don't know, in the 60s we said we're going to live fast and die young, but it didn't happen. I'll be 80 in June, so so I feel very blessed of being part of an amazing time. The 60s were really amazing, and I feel very blessed in having been a part of that. And I think it's wonderful that Alyssa and Sophia have put together this evening for us to kind of look back and hear about ourselves. It's kind of interesting hearing about ourselves. So thank you.
So maybe I'll follow on from that. So you've woven this picture of this really exciting, possibility-laden time of things happening by, in some cases, happy accidents, friendships, being kind of embraced into other environments or practices, even when you're 15, or maybe because of that also, because a greater sense of giving agency maybe to younger people than there is now. But I also thought about the other side. So I remember reading in Jill Drowell's book on people being concerned about you being out as a 15-year-old and wondering what dangers you might have encountered in those moments. And I can also think of the other sort of darker side that you paint in The Singer's Tale. So I wonder if you could talk to us, and anyone in the panel, about realising that actually things weren't completely as possibility-laden for women as they were for men.
A bed of roses, darling. Actually, again, connection with you. The Exploding Galaxy did a performance at fondly known as Alexandra Palace in '66. And I was heavily pregnant with my son at the time, and John Hopkins, I know some people here, Hoppy, wonderful Hoppy. There was a light tower from which all the light shows were onto the stage. And I was, I think, about 8.5 months, so I was about to pop. Yes. And on the stage, I discovered, wearing one of my frocks, which I bought on Portobello Road, was my husband's big love at the time. I didn't know about it. So she was wearing my frock, which was being ripped to shreds. And on the light tower, various men looked at me and said, "Bloody hell, she's pregnant, oh my God, somebody get her out of here." John Hopkins, who was always a very different man to most of the men around at that time, basically put a protective arm, shall we say, around. But that signalled to me the status that I had as a new fledgling singer, working, earning a living, not a lot, but earning a living. As soon as I had that child, I was Larry's old lady. I no longer had status as a woman with a job, because whatever you say, you know, I chose to be a musician as a job, as a way to earn my living. Yes, I loved it, and I feel blessed and privileged to have mostly earned a living from what I love to do. But I had to fight. And at that time, in the late 60s, most of the musicians in the Grove area where I was living were male bands. Leading up to that time, I had worked with a band called The Race, and we were, again, a representation of London as a city at that time. So there was a white singer, me, a guitarist who was white, the drummer was black, the harmonica player was from Nigeria, the bass player was a mixed race guy, lovely guy from Brixton. We were not signed. So we were doing the same gigs as a lot of bands around the country at that time, but I lived in London. So we were selling out gigs like the Marquee and Klux Clique and this and that. They didn't sign us, no, because deeply entrenched amongst the sexism within the recording industry at that time was racism. And I only found out later that whilst we, as a little group of people fondly imagining our fame and fortune and lovely life we will have, up the road at Euston Station they were still employing a whites-only hiring policy. And that, I think, did filter down into the recording companies, the A&R guys, and they were all guys. And so I went into life as a young woman with a child quite early and found myself quite quickly on my own with the child, that I wasn't only facing sexism, but I was seeing my friends subjected to racism. Yes, it was a wonderful time, creatively, culturally. I made wonderful friends, and again, I keep going to Jill because we have so many connections between us, but it was not the aforementioned bed of roses.
You asked when we realised. I don't think I realised at the time. I think the penny dropped when I read Germaine Green's book, and I think for a lot of us it did. But I do remember one moment in '68, I happened to be in Paris on my school holidays, and it happened to be a very critical time. And I can remember going to this commune outside, it was just outside Paris, and so I went to it was outside Paris, and there were all these men sitting round talking about the proletariat, and the women were doing the hoovering, and they actually lifted their legs so that we could hoover on with their feet while they were talking about equality. So that was the time I remember the penny dropping, but it wasn't really until Germaine got going with her book. And
when I grew up, I thought men were superior because they were all the painters and all the composers and everything. So and we were taught not to be, rude to men. And my sister, she was terrible. She never said no, and she got abused by. I mean, I just sort of like ran away, but she got abused by the priest, the dentist, the doctor, all these people, and you just she just took it, and that's what I think the tragedy is, that we didn't realize, till, and when people started saying feminism, I was scared to be a feminist because I thought they'd call me a lesbian, if I was a feminist, and it wasn't until I got involved in the goddess movement, and I remember thinking, God's going to be angry that I'm believing in the goddess. Which is sort of, but I think eventually, when I became a feminist, I was, a protest singer. I was all there, but it took me a long time because of my generation, because we were accepting these things. We were accepting, it was so hard to exist and bring out your own personality. And the music industry was ridden with it, that's the whole thing. It was completely a man's world. So.
I think we were really protesting about the bomb, and the war was still hanging over the UK. I actually only came here when I was was 8, I was born in the West Indies, but you could feel it in the atmosphere, this whole kind of war thing that had been going on. People with the rationing books and things like that. So when it came to the atom bomb, and we realised that what had been happening in Nagasaki, it was such a horror. We just didn't. We had to learn from this. We never go with this. So a lot of it was about protesting that as women.
But as protest, it has to be a broader spectrum. As Julie just said, I'm quite shocked. I recently heard a programme on the radio. I'm a complete radio fan, and it was around the Me Too debate, and it was a wonderful debate amongst women saying, look within, are we as women sexist? Do we accept, as you were saying, do I look at a woman who's older and think, oh, she's past it, dear, she can't do the job? What? I had that in my 40s, let alone in my mid-70s, that thing of, an older man can be on the television looking wise, but an older woman you must not look at. But I think, for all of us, we now have to look at a broader range across feminism, because I'm seeing schisms now that I'm really worried about. I remember in the 70s, and I was then the single mother of a 3-year-old baby boy, and I was doing masses of work, rock against racism later in this, but earlier than that I was doing a lot of feminist and events, so women only. And I was asked to do several women-only festivals, and at one of them the woman said, oh, but you can't bring your son. And I said, he's 3. Oh, but he's a man. I said, he's a boy, and surely you're being counterproductive. If you ban me, I'm a single parent, where's your empathy? So I think feminism has always had its schisms like anything else. We're looking at the Labour Party now in a complete mess and schism and all of that, and feminism is no different. And I think as a woman what I long to see is more debate, more calm, mature debate between women, because I don't want to see, I know there is a section in feminism now that really will not accept transgender women. Well, poo to you and your compassion is all I can say about that one.
I think that out of the protest thing, women did come. I mean, Greenham Common was such an enormous thing, but lots of things were going on amongst women whereby they weren't accepting any male around at all. But Greenham Common was kind of established women, not as feminists, but as a movement that could have something to say, really. I have to say one thing, actually. Granny Takes a Trip, most of the design was done by Sheila Cohen, who was the partner of Nigel Weymouth, who had the shop. And it was Sheila, his partner, who actually did most of the design. One very famous thing that one of the guys did, John Pierce, was that jacket that all the rock star boys wore, and I wore it.
Very expensive, too expensive.
Being androgynous at the time. So, yeah, Sheila Cohen, she was the one that really designed all this stuff.
Well, can I just come back to that? Because very often men took the credit of the women, and I have to say, you mentioned Richard Neville. He's a little bit of a culprit here, because he came to England with someone called Louise Berrier, who everyone who was a witness at the time said was the heart and soul of Oz magazine, which came out in '67. And I actually have written down, in 2009 he wrote his autobiography, and he described Louise Berrier, bearing in mind that he could not function with that magazine without her. And here are some things he says about her 30 years later, or however many decades later, when he happens to write his autobiography. Now, this is what we get. Louise wearing iridescent tie silk. Louise in her white jeans and sloppy Joe. Louise in a silver Lurex Micro Mini. Louise poised and easy in red striped mini dress. Louise looked shy and demure in a lollipop pink shift. Now this is someone talking in 2009 about someone who was crucial to his success in his career. But your original question was about finding women who were working and were, and I had a very good experience because of the Exploding Galaxy, because this was a group of people who were working with kinetic artists or had lots of contact with kinetic artists. And there were some wonderful ones like Lillian Lynn and Ligia Clark. These people were taking photographs. I never saw a single woman take a photograph in the 1960s. I know there were plenty of women taking pictures in the 70s, and we have one here. But in the 60s, I never saw a man behind a camera, a woman behind a camera, a film camera, or a... Where is it gone? Doesn't matter. But there were people doing it. They were artists working actively. We just didn't see them. They were there, but we didn't see them.
And just coming back to your point about women who were creating those schisms, or perhaps thinkingly colluding or being sexist towards other women. In relation to a point that Jill raised before the panel began, and she spoke to Sophia and myself particularly about a short Germaine Greer film called Darling, Do You Love Me? And the various feelings that resonated within her when she watched this film, as in contrast to the feelings that resonated within her when she read The Female Eunuch. I thought we could just take a moment to watch this very short clip and maybe discuss it.
Darling, do you love me? Darling, do you love me? Darling, do you love me? Do you love me? Darling, do you love me? Darling, say you love me. Do you love me? Say you love me. Say you love me. Listed as a satirical film, and I actually don't think it's satirical. In that film, the woman is hectoring, harassing, emasculating, and she ends up, does she strangle him in the end? Right, so this is a woman who wants commitment, and she wants her partner to say he loves her. And that was so much the male thinking of that, let me say it, the Oz crowd. That magazine had a whole lot of people connected to it. And the general feeling, and I think it was International Times as well, was that you mustn't worry if your boyfriend went off and screwed somebody else. You mustn't ever express the interest in having a long-term commitment. And it was, that's how it was. Yeah. So there you are, a woman who, a couple of years now, I tried to work out when that film was made, and I looked and saw there were, just then, that there were leaves on the ground. So it was autumn of 67. And when did she publish Female Eunuch? Probably 70. So she had 3 years to wake up. There are other things she did, like as editor of Suck magazine, which I think confirm that she was, I wouldn't say she's colluding, but it's a bit ambiguous, her message there.
What was happening in certainly the industry I was in, which I would never have used that word then, but the music business, as we found out, you know, in that mix in the 60s and the 70s lay a very murky underlayer of things. And I can remember distinctly being groped in various situations, and when I rebuffed them, it's the accusation, as if it was a shocking thing, was, ooh, you're frigid, or you're a lesbian, or I never fancied you anyway. You know, and people got away with that for a very long time. And they still do. This is the tragic thing, which is why we now have the so-called Me Too debate.
So, did you develop any strategies or any tactics?
Yes, I did.
Are they the same ones we have now? What were they?
Yes.
What are they?
I didn't knee them in the bollocks because I had a son and I knew how painful that would be. I would just pierce them from my 5 foot fuck all with my steely eyes and just say, you, come on, you dare, you know. I was lucky. I was really lucky, although I had some quite dodgy moments in my life, and I know other women in my business who had worse. Absolutely. But I'd spent a childhood and an early adolescence putting up with that shit, and I was not going to put up with it as an adult woman. And I think that carried me through. But I really think that we have to address those things still now. And I don't know what the answer is, because, as I say, I feel with everything that's going on now, with the the immigrant situation, everything, we're kind of taking steps backwards. And I think the younger generation have got to be unbelievably strong. Unbelievably strong.
I had absolutely no strategies. I happened to be very lucky, so in a way this is a cop-out, because I happened to be surrounded by a group of people who were notorious, but actually not sexually aggressive. There were plenty of heterosexual people in the house, and they weren't all clambering all over you, and you didn't have to have your hand on the doorknob to get out. So for me, I didn't ever feel that I was in a dangerous place. And I have to say that not everyone in the I call it the underground. I was reminded that I used to call it the underground. For me, it's the underground, but we call it the counterculture. But I think across the board, there were a range of behaviours. The predominant behaviour was led by these magazines, and pretty awful. But I personally felt quite safe.
You've also referred to both women and men who were supportive in those contexts, and I'm thinking of Carol's book where she talks about kind of men who were fellow allies or fellow travellers, and Julie talking to me about Mickey Most encouraging her to start writing her own songs. I wonder if perhaps any of you would like to talk to those men who were supportive and were fellow travellers.
Yes, they're not all horrible. No. I think, and certainly, Mickey was very helpful, and musicians have been supportive. But underneath it was always this culture. I mean, you did have a few heroes that protected you, but I always felt vulnerable. I always felt, and I couldn't just say fuck off. I wasn't raised that way, and I sort of, and to be honest, occasionally I just go to bed with them because they're just so persistent. Not very often, and I'm ashamed to say that, but it was a kind of defense, because they might have gotten rough, and so it was really, and I'm reminded that in the 60s, it was free love and all this, but it wasn't so great for women. I mean, it was a lot of women got pregnant, had to raise kids on their own. They didn't have any support. And I'm reminded of Bob Dylan's song saying, walking down that long dusty road, girl, and you just wasted my precious time, and because he was all enlightened and she wasn't, and that to me, so I actually wrote another song answering that song, saying what might have happened to the girl after that. But it says, on a rainy day I met you, and I let you come and stay with me. In the morning my dreams were swaying, I heard you saying, come away with me. You took me down the highway, made me watch each cloud. Smoke would rise and clear my eyes, the sky would sing out loud. Then the sun was shining brightly, you whispered lightly, and you said goodbye. You said I love you, and I heard you, but like a bird you had to fly. You left me all alone, I thought that I would die, but now I'm on my own, and slowly I'll learn how to fly. I can't, as I say, I'm almost 80 now, and I've never been so excited as what's happening with the Me Too movement. I think it's about time. Someone said women have given birth to the entire human race. And a lot of times, you know, and carried kids in our bellies for 9 months, and they take our enamel and everything, you know, and sometimes we raise those kids under really difficult circumstances. So I think now about time, and we need the men to help us to tear down the walls of patriarchy. Me Too, it's time's up. Yes, yes, yes.
Of course, the other thing politically that happened, of course, in the 60s was the pill. And so it was, from my, you know, in retrospect, looking back, the pill was a huge yes from a lot of heterosexual guys. It's like, oh, you know, if she's on the pill, I can shag and leave and there's no pregnancy involved. So that, for us, as women raised in that in this country, we call it the baby boomers. I was born in 44, just before the end of the war, but I think that's encompassed in the general time that was called baby boomers. So we went through the austerity of the 50s, and then suddenly you never had it so good and high purchase, and the pill, which meant an awful lot of men went around having what they called free love. Free for who? Not for the women. And I have an image of women in long skirts endlessly cooking bloody brown rice and vegetables, whilst the guys were rolling the spliffs and hot, you know, piling on the pipe and talking man talk. And of course, in answer to your question, I have been blessed, and still some of them that are still on the planet, still alive, have met the most amazing men and raised one. Thank you.
Talking about fellow travellers, I'm just trying to, I think, sort of speaking generally and then in the particular. In general, there were people like Mark Boyle, and he wasn't the only person doing light shows, but he was an amazing artist. And he was particularly interested in the random, and he got a name for himself, and he had lots of exhibitions. And I remember at UFO, at the club, where he was one of the light show people, there was always a woman next to him, and that was Joan Hills. And you know, at some point he said, hang on a minute, what am I doing? I'm an artist, but I'm not a solo male at this. So he brought in her name as well as his, and then when the children grew up, he used the children's names and they became the Boyle family, and that's an example of a sort of fellow traveller.
So we've talked about male allies and those that got in the way, but one thing I'd like to ask about, given we're standing here and some of us are friends and collaborators, is about female friendship and actually the role that collaboration amongst women worked in all its different ways. And I wonder if that impacted on your journey during the 60s, or that came later, or you know, how that shaped your practice and your lifestyle.
I think for me, I have the same women friends I've had since I was just young, and every time I see them, it's quite a small amount actually. It's just like I saw them yesterday, but it might be 50 years. So it's just like yesterday. And with women around me, yeah, there's a lot of negativity, but it's the same with men. There's a kind of gender jealousy. Doesn't matter if it's a woman or a man. I'm sure I've colluded with all kinds of things by even being a fashion model, you know, that is a collusion, isn't it, in itself? So, or being a pop star's girlfriend or something. It's just such a cliche, really.
By the end of the 70s, for me, I'd started meeting women who were more instrumentalists as well as other singers. And by the 80s, I think I was purposefully, because of the lack of women instrumentalists particularly, purposefully seeking out women to work with, and still do. Next gig I have in London are, going back to something I said earlier, two transgender women, one lesbian, me, and a male drummer. I think that's a lovely mix myself, but the interesting thing is these are all people I've known for 45 years. I mean, we go back, we have relationship, friendship, collaboration. So this is not me going, oh, I'll pick one of you, one of you, one of you, and one of you. This has come out of friendship and collaboration, and I feel very fortunate because of the way I sat in the great scheme of the accident of birth, to have come in through the 60s, done my experiments and did plenty of that, and then was able to meet other women who wanted the same things as I did and wanted the same situation. In other words, being respected for what you did, how you were, not your gender, your age, or where you came from, just for who you are and what you do. And I really treasure that and still do, and I'm lucky. Although being gay was illegal and they still operated a whites-only policy in many places of work, most of the bands, the music industry side, were either bands with female singers or 4 or 5 white men. End of. So I'm happy to say that I think some things have changed, and there are more women out there as bass players and drummers and guitarists and writers and composers and making their own work more than there were in my younger days, I have to say that, and that's a good thing.
Thinking, Julie, about Jenny's point, and one of the things that you said to me when we'd been talking about the way in which Dusty showed you how to take control in the recording studio.
Yeah.
And how much you enjoy singing with Madeleine Bell.
Yeah, wonderful women. I became friends with Dusty in the 60s, and she was such a dedicated singer. I think England's best singer ever, female singer. And she and I was just going to the studio. I was put behind a piece of glass and told to sing. You know, I mean, I did get an input on what material, but I didn't play my own guitar. People played other things, and it was, and I just sort of accepted that. And she'd say, "What was the name of the bass player? And what was that pattern the guy was doing on the drums?" And to have a woman that much involved in the actual music was eye-opening. And she listened to my album. She said, "You should do that. You should do that. You should do that." And so the next time I went into a studio, I started sort of expressing myself, and they didn't know what happened, But one thing she did teach me, because I hate singing with earphones. You have one off and one on, and they off. And she taught me to sing with a speaker, and then you could sing out rather than singing. You could sing like you were really singing. So she helped me a lot. But I remember what I was going to say. Can I say it really quick? I was saying that throughout the ages, women have been taught to not like each other, to be jealous of each other's boyfriends and do all that. And they've been isolated in the home. They're not supposed to, and the whole idea of women getting together is something it's coming back, and I think it's very positive. And in the 90s, I took trips. I took women to sacred sites. We went, like Stonehenge and Avebury and all over. And we had a bus full of women. It was women only. And it was very hard to find a woman bus driver, but we found a woman bus driver in Bristol. And it was amazing. And I must say that the atmosphere there is a unique atmosphere. And I think it's the same with men, if they're all in the shower room or something. And we should preserve those spaces where only women go, because it is a different support system. And I think it maybe from years of conditioning that when we had to relieve the bus driver because it was 18 days, so we had a male bus driver. The minute we had a male bus driver, the woman said, "Oh, could I get you a cup of tea? They were looking after the driver." I said, "He's supposed to be looking after us, you know." So anyway, I'm just saying that this idea of women's space is very important, very important. They used to have it in the old days, you know. The women would get together in sanctuary, and they'd all have their period at the same time, and they would all nurture each other and support each other. And this thing of being not allowed to be friends with other women because men find it threatening is changing, and it's wonderful. It's not the same.
So one of my closest friendships is with someone who's in their mid to late 70s, and actually hearing about those experiences, you know, I worry that something that gets lost in the different debates across the different waves of feminism is, you know, we can get cross about, like you said, you know, kind of very critical issues, but we also need to make those connections, and we need to, you know, hearing your stories informs our experiences now. So yeah, I'm enjoying this. This is an example of that.
People get in a little bubble of where they live and where they operate. And sometimes when some of women of my generation have said, well, we've come so far, you know, the suffragists and suffragettes and the vote, and then the 60s, and I say, well, hang on a minute, just go across the bloody channel. Go south, you know, women in countries where they are not just way below the scale in terms of respect, but they are mutilated, still mutilated, you know, and these things are still going on our planet now. And I think we tend to get in our own comfort little bubble of where we live and think, well, we've achieved this and we've achieved that. Well, hey, you know, there are women all over this planet, and some of them are living as if they were living back in, I don't know, 1223 and a half, I don't know. So I think we need to think far out of our own little bubbles sometimes.
I'm just thinking about stepping outside your own little bubble, reflecting, having realizations later on. I wondered if there was some kind of advice that you might give to yourself back in 1968, given what you know and have experienced since.
Personally, and this is probably a bit cynical, but I would say, it doesn't matter how benign a person presents themselves. If they're wearing bells and beads, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a benign person. So look beneath the exterior messages you're getting. And I think that would have stood me in very good stead throughout my life, I think.
I think if I would give myself advice back then, it would to be more self-confident. I was really scared. I thought I was ugly, you know. And I look at myself now, when in the 60s, I didn't look that bad, you know. But I thought I was overweight. I thought I was this. I thought I was so insecure. I mean, I think I still am. I think women, everybody is to a certain extent. But I think to be more self-confident, to find help. I mean, now you have a million support groups. You know, you have Believe in Yourself. You have therapists. But you didn't get those then. I mean, I wish I had had a good therapist. That would have helped.
When in the 60s, around about the beginning of 1968, there seemed to be this thing happening about girls who just wanted to sleep with boys in bands, really, the kind of groupies. And this was really the time that I fell out of love with the counterculture. We just didn't have the voice, a strong enough voice to say, we don't want this. I don't like this, you know. It was all around the music.
I would say, very similar to you, Julie, I look back and think, why were you so worried, so insecure? So I had that thing of thinking everybody was more worthy, more talented, more beautiful, taller, but hey, that's not difficult. And I just think, at 74 I am now, and I think, what a waste of time. But I think that's probably true of a lot of men as well, going through one's youth and being insecure. And it really does depend on your background, I suppose, to a certain extent. But I've met people that normally I wouldn't have given the time of day to because they were rich and posh. And I had a problem with that, a bit of a chip I think I had as a youngster. But I've met people who, to all intents and purposes, looked like they had a very privileged life. But if you talk deeply, you find that we all have our lacks of confidence, our insecurities, and I think they're more prevalent when we're young, which is why I think the older generation need to sometimes just think back, what was I like when I was 17, 22, 27, and just get a little bit more clued in to the basic human condition over millennia. It's always been pretty similar, give or take a year or two.
And I'd just like to thank our fabulous panellists. Thank you so much for your thoughts and ideas, and it's been really inspiring. So thank you very much.
And please do continue conversations, discussions, ideas, thoughts you've had about all of this in the break. It's 15 minutes. Please do come back.